Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to another edition of Nickel Press TV. We're on week 15 already. This is our fantasy football show, our Tuesday night edition. I'm Doug Moore. I'm a member of one of the founders of Nickel Press TV. Joined this week by a buddy of mine, very smart fantasy football mind, especially in Dynasty football, considering where he writes for. That's Nick Whalen, writes for Dynasty League Football. Nick, how are you?
I'm doing great tonight. It's always fun. Thanks for having me on. I love talking football. It's going to be fun to do the show.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure having you on. It's literally we talk about so much fantasy football that we don't even get through everything that we want to usually, but hopefully we can try and contain ourselves enough. But Nick, I know that you write for Dynasty League, but I know you got so much more going on. So what are you up to these days besides just simply writing for Dynasty League Football, DLF?
Well, I kind of have to thank my wife for all the stuff I'm involved in. I'm on two podcasts. I do the Saturday to Sunday football podcast. That's mainly looking at college prospects. We talk the bowl games and stuff like that. And then I also do Filmetrics podcast, which I join with George Creedicos. He's RotoHack on Twitter, but he's an analytics guy, and I'm a film guy as a former college coach. We just join forces and just break down prospects. And then on top of that, I do the Devy Report, which is a huge, over 100-page document just breaking down college prospects and giving Dynasty League, Devy League, even DFS college guys an insight into kind of college guys and how they're going to project in the NFL.
Yeah, no, that's a ton of stuff, and that really you're starting really early for Dynasty League, even before these players get drafted by their team, because being drafted by a team could affect your outlook. Whether you go to a situation where you could be a starter or you're going to be a third stringer somewhere, that could really affect it. But that's a lot of work. I've talked to George a few times. He's a great football guy as well. I know he writes over at DLF as well. That's a ton of stuff. So I got a fellow podcaster on. Fellow podcaster, I should say, on with me. But for this show, we're going to talk about Week 15 football, fantasy football. That is, it's crazy. We are already if not every league is in the playoffs now. We're talking mostly semifinals. So those teams that are still in it are definitely going to need some fantasy advice with all the injuries that happened this weekend. And we'll jump right in. There's just a ton of injuries. I know you and I were talking about this before the show. There's just a ton of injuries, and it's just riddled across the league. Not only this past weekend, but just the overall season. We saw somebody like Andy Dalton who started off really hot and then plateaued. He's out for the rest of the season, most likely with a broken thumb. Tyler Eifert went down with a concussion. For some reason, I'm losing track. LeGarrette Blount, we just lost today for the rest of the season. T.J. Yeldon went down with a knee injury. Doesn't look like he's going to play this weekend, considering the moves they've made. Vincent Jackson went down with a knee injury. He's not going to play on Thursday. There's just a ton of injuries, and I know I'm forgetting some. Thomas Rawls, of course. He's down for the season with a broken ankle. So we're going to be talking about who to pick up, who to grab to try and replace those guys, especially for those who may have suffered an injury or two, but someone made it to the next round. So I know that the big topic, at least today, is, and I want to ask you this, Nick. A lot of people are asking, who to rank in terms of running backs out there on the waiver wire. You got Tim Hightower in some leagues, you got Denard Robinson, you got Bryce Brown, who's now it looks like the new starting running back, at least the early down back for Seattle. Brandon Bolden, James White, even there's a ton of names out there that are serviceable. None, not a Thomas Rawls or a Charkandrick West, but there's a ton of names out there that could help a team that suffers from injuries. So I want to ask you, where do you sort of rank these players? Who in what order would you say for these running backs that you would go? Unless and of course if I'm missing any, please tell me. But just for tomorrow, for people who are picking up on the waiver wire. How would you rank these running backs on most waiver wires?
No, that's a good question. I mean, if people are out there and they're still battling, good luck, because it's tough to look at this injury report and find people. But I think the main thing you have to look at is, all of these guys, they're very not high in the prospects, or else they would be starters. So what I like to look at is I have to look at the situation. What situations really utilize their running back the most? And I think you have to look at Seattle and basically look at Lynch, and he went down, and then what happened to Rawls, and they just fed him, and he got huge fantasy numbers for people and probably got some of you guys to the playoffs. So I would look to Bryce Brown. I haven't seen any reports that Lynch is coming back anytime soon, so I would try and grab him. Brown has shown some of that ability starting in Philadelphia. He even had a couple of bright spots in Buffalo. And then don't forget, Bryce Brown was the number one prospect at running back in the country many years ago out of high school. So he always has had that athletic ability. So that's a guy that I would have number one. After that, I would probably look at Denard Robinson a little bit. They actually picked up Jonas Gray off of waivers, Jacksonville I'm talking about. So right there, you know that, hey, this Yeldon knee injury may be a little bit worse than they want to lean on to. So he'd probably be second. James White should already be up there or picked up just because of his role, and he's done pretty well in New England. But I don't know who's going to get the carries there. I think you're a New England fan, if I remember right. What do you think about the New England situation?
Yeah, so it's a difficult situation. You've lost Dion Lewis, and now you've lost Garrett Blount this season. It's tough to be a New England fan right now, but they did win over the weekend. But, you're really down to it looks like 3 running backs, maybe 4. But the two running backs are actually on the main roster right now are Brandon Bolden and James White, like you mentioned. I would have to imagine that James White is going to stick in his role. I think he has 14 catches over the past 2 weeks. I think he's going to stick in that third down role, that passing down role. And as long as Edelman's out, there's certainly going to be targets to be shared. So I could definitely see James White, getting a few carries. I think he's had only 3 carries over the past 2 weeks. We did have a goal line touchdown on Sunday. But I would think that Brandon Bolden gets the majority of the early down work. He can catch out of the backfield. He's a special teamer. But, if I had to rank it, especially in PPR, I'd probably have James White ahead just because he has that role, and he had that role before Garrett Blount went down. And then you got, I believe, Trey Williams and now Monte Ball on practice squad. They're probably going to bring one of those guys up, but he won't be anything more than a change-of-pace guy. So for me, I'm probably going to go with James White over Brandon Bolden, but Brandon Bolden probably going to get the majority of the early down work, but we've seen New England just toy with us in terms of 1 week a running back going for 150 and a touchdown, the next week in 7 carries. So for me, I would think James White is the more trustworthy running back out of any in New England right now. But you brought up a good point about Bryce Brown. You said that Bryce Brown, he's always been a talented guy. I think the biggest problem he's faced is he has some problems with ball security. He's had some problems with fumbling in Philadelphia. I know he was traded to Buffalo for a 6th-round pick a few years ago. And, he was a favorite of the GM, but the coaches didn't like him because he couldn't hold on to the ball. And it was really shocking. We saw yesterday Pete Carroll talk about, DeJuan Harris and Bryce Brown both getting to compete for who gets the lead back, sort of early down work. And then, of course, today, a little bit of a bombshell, DeJuan Harris was waived. I heard it might be an injury. But who knows? It's shocking regardless. But, yeah, Bryce Brown is definitely, especially with how they've done with running backs. But if anything, they've picked up their passing game since. Russell Wilson is going, haywire in terms of how he's been doing. But for me, the only other guy I really would love this week is Denard Robinson. He last season when he did start a good, I think, a 5 or 6-game stretch before he went down with a season-ending injury. I think it was a foot injury or something. He was doing really well. And that was with, Blake Bortles not doing well, Allen Robinson not doing much, Allen Hurns being a flash in the pan. He did really well, I think. And now, we saw him in about a quarter and a half go for 75 yards and a touchdown against the Colts. And now he's going up against Atlanta, who has a relatively weak run defense. I think they've given up, if I'm not mistaken, 15 rushing touchdowns this season. Which is, I think, second in the league. If not, I think it might be tied with Detroit. So I really love his matchup this week. Dalvin Did I leave anybody out, Nick? Is there anybody else that you'd want to mention in there that people should be going after for running backs?
Well, if you didn't pick up Hightower last week, I assume someone else did. But if not, grab him because they fed him, and it was really telling how often Sean Payton went to a guy that hasn't played a lot of football in years over C.J. Spiller. So I'd pick him up if he's still out there.
Yeah, and the thing with Hightower, I think when it comes to running backs in fantasy, there's two things that you have to look at. There are two determining factors. One, how he's doing with the touches he gets, and two, how many touches he is getting. And we saw Hightower get 28 touches over the weekend, but only 85 yards, which is just a tad higher than 3 yards a carry, which is not that good. But he did get a touchdown. But again, he also got 28 touches. I don't expect him to get 28 touches every game, but could he get 15 to 20? Sure. And I believe he has another easy matchup this week. So we could see him definitely score. C.J. Spiller is really nothing in terms of the run game. He's really just a passing down back who, disappointed a lot of people. I thought he could have been really well this season, but just have not done anything. And I don't think there really is anybody else there. So I would think that Tim Hightower, you brought him up, is a solid running back to add based on volume alone. And anything else he gives you is a plus, because I just don't think he has that much left. It's a huge downgrade from Mark Ingram because he could catch out of the backfield as well. And just Mark Ingram's a lot more talented. But that offensive line just hinders any running backs in terms of their ceiling. And then just, Tim Hightower is way past his prime. He unfortunately, I don't think is going to turn into the next Justin Forsett, where he's this journeyman guy who all of a sudden goes haywire and saves people's fantasy season. But I think if you can get Hightower, I'd definitely have him there based on just volume alone. So moving into, we saw a lot of injuries this weekend or over the past few weekends at the tight end position. We saw Jimmy Graham go down with a knee injury. We saw Martellus Bennett was put on the IR last week. And now Tyler Eifert went down with a concussion, and who knows how long it'll be until he gets back. So for me, if there's one guy I'm dialing in on to try and get, and feel free to add any more that you think should be mentioned here, but I love Zach Miller in terms of what he's done when Martellus Bennett is out. Now that he's out for the rest of the season, Miller is the unquestioned starter. He over the weekend went for a touchdown and 85 yards on 5 receptions, and I actually have a little tidbit here. I'm not as deep in analytics as maybe you and George are, but he has had at least 5 targets in 4 of the last 5 games and 5 touchdowns over the past 6 games. So I think with, Marquise Wilson just was announced that he's on the IR. Kevin White will not be playing this season. And Eddie Royal, he started out well in the season, but he hasn't done much since. I think that Zach Miller is the primary red zone option for them, for the Bears, and I think he could do really well. I think he's a weekly top 10 tight end just because of the situation. And, another journeyman who somehow is doing well with his the given opportunity. So I would go out and get Zach Miller, especially with the injuries that the tight end position has seen, and just because he's been doing well in the replacement of Bennett. But any other tight ends that you'd recommend people going and picking up?
No, he was my main guy, and I'm a Bears fan up here in Wisconsin, so it's tough for the last few years. But I don't think people realize how athletic Zach Miller is. I mean, he's been through not just injuries like an ankle or a shoulder. He's had some devastating injuries that he's continually come back and fought back for. He had a really impressive preseason last year that people don't know about, done for the year, came back this year, fought back, and even on Sunday, he's making guys miss. He's explosive in the open field. I mean, he's really flashing some good stuff. One guy, he's probably picked up in a lot of leagues, but if Will Tye is still out there, he's flashing. He's getting consistent targets. He has 4 more targets over the last 5 games. So that's a guy that, you can get some production from if, you have an injury. I hope you don't have to start someone that deep this late in the year, but if you have to, that's certainly a guy that, maybe you could even trade for or pick up on the waivers.
Yeah, no, and we saw him score his first touchdown last night. And someone brought up a good point. I have to agree with them. I think that Will Tye is their number 2 target in New York. Ruben Randall has had good games. He's had bad games, and he's had just in the middle games. He's inconsistent. And then, you really haven't seen much out of Shane Vereen, Rashad Jennings, or any of those running backs. And obviously, there's really no one at the wide receiver position besides Odell Beckham, obviously, who's their number 1 guy. But other than that, I think Will Tye is, the number 2 guy at worst. And I think that, he did score a touchdown last night. And I think that, if Eli continues to play at a at least high enough level where he's throwing for 250 or more yards and 2 touchdowns, I could definitely see Will Tye getting a touchdown almost every week. Just, that offense, for whatever reason, seems to be clicking, especially with Odell Beckham just lighting it up. So I think he's a weekly touchdown threat. And someone's got to take over Larry Janelle's role. Larry Janelle scored, I think, 3 touchdowns in a game last season. So are we going to see that from Will Tye? I don't think so, but someone's got to pick up the slack. I wanted to ask you if this guy is for real. Now, obviously, over the past 5 games, Heath Miller has 32 receptions. Oh, sorry about that. But he has 32 receptions over the past 5 games. But 20 of those have come against the Bengals. Is he for real? Because in those other 3 games, he would have had only 12 receptions in 3 games. So we're talking 4 receptions a game. Do you think his numbers are inflated by those Cincinnati games? Or do you think he's a guy that can get you 5 catches a week for, say, 50 yards?
I would say it's a flash. Because if you look at the remainder of his season, because you brought up a good point, those are 2 big games out of his last 5, and his remaining big reception game there was 5 for 45 between there. But then if you look at his first 6 games, his high game is 8 for 84, and then his next one is 3 for 46, and then it's 2, 2, 1, and 1 reception. So you're looking at a guy that didn't get a lot of targets. Now, again, Big Ben was hurt. Is that a thing that's, a Michael Vick or a Landry Jones thing versus Big Ben? I'm not sure, but he's not a guy that I want to count on right now and gamble. I think it's a game plan thing where Cincinnati took away the best threats and then they just dumped Miller a lot. And really, he's not going to get a lot after the catch for you. He just doesn't have the juice in the legs anymore. So I think he's a flash in the pan.
Yeah, no, it's hard because I don't think he's really scored any touchdowns this season, which really limits his upside in fantasy, considering how well that Pittsburgh offense is doing and the fact that he's still not getting any touchdowns, really. I don't think he's scored any lately. But one other guy I was curious about, I recommended him last week, and unfortunately it didn't turn out well, or as well as I thought it would. Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Now, we saw week 1, obviously, at the beginning of the season, everybody was healthy. I think he went for 100 and something yards and 2 touchdowns with Jameis Winston at quarterback. And then, he had a bad game, but he left early, and then he missed 9 games with a shoulder injury. And I think it's been 3 weeks or 2 weeks. Hasn't really done much. But Vincent Jackson's now out, for the foreseeable future. I've read some places that he might be out the rest of the season with this new knee injury. Is Seferian-Jenkins the guy that you would go after? Or is he, again, like a Heath Miller where he had a really good game and he's just a flash in the pan?
This is going to go back to my college scouting stuff. I've never been very high on Austin Seferian-Jenkins. So he'd be a guy that I would pass on. I think that week 1 against the Titans, I mean, if you remember that game, that's when Mariota went off and he was just super efficient. So the Bucs were down. They had to throw a lot. And I think he just kind of got lucky because his remaining 3 games, his high game has been 3 for 31. And that's out of 6 targets. So that means he's not catching at a great rate. He's not getting a ton of yards per reception either. So that's a guy that I'd pass on. Now, then again, if you're that desperate and you have to pick and you need a guy that could get a bunch of targets, I mean, if you're a defense like the Rams they're playing this week, you want to take away Mike Evans, obviously. So maybe they will feed him, but that's definitely a gamble I don't want to take this week.
Yeah, no, I remember, if I'm not mistaken, Austin Jenkins was a highly touted tight end prospect out of Washington. I think he was the first tight end picked last year in the draft of 2014. But yeah, I don't think he's turned into much. Oh, you know what? I'm wrong, because Eric Ebron was picked before him. Sorry. He was picked at like 10th overall, which seems ridiculous. But that's college draft. I have nothing to do with that. I'm a fantasy football guy, and you know, I struggle with that sometimes, so I'll stick to that only. Moving into the wide receivers a little bit. For me, a guy that I'm really interested in how he's been doing, considering just how explosive he is, but he hadn't really been featured in the offense much, that's Tyler Lockett. Now, we mentioned, Seattle has, suffered another injury at running back, but they've been doing really well in the past game. I know Doug Baldwin's gotten 7 touchdowns over the past 3 games, and if he's not owned, you need to grab him, because I think he's a must-start right now, just considering how well Seattle's doing. But Tyler Lockett hasn't done that bad either. He has 13 receptions on 14 targets, very efficient, for almost 200 yards and 2 touchdowns over the past 2 games. He's averaging, 70 yards a game, and he has 4 touchdowns over the past 4 games. Just with how well Russell Wilson is doing, just how well that passing offense is doing, I'm telling people to go and grab him, and I think he's even a very worthy flex play, no matter what league you're in. But if you're in a league where you get return yards, he's almost a must-start anyway. He was almost a must-start before, but I think he has to be a must-start now. But wanted to ask you, what's your opinion? Going back to your you delve a little bit into his college prospects. He's a rookie, so I'm sure you got to see him a little bit when he was at Kansas State. What do you think about Tyler Lockett in this offense right now? Do you think it's, this sort of production can continue, or is this just he's going through a good stretch?
I think this is just kind of a sign of things to come with Tyler Lockett. So I'm with you. I really like him. He's not one of those guys where, hey, look, he's fast. He's a guy that's a technician. He's a really good route runner. He showed that in college, and then he showed that early, even in the NFL. It's not like he's just blown up here recently. I mean, he's had some solid games throughout the year. Obviously, he's flashed in the return game, too, so he's a playmaker when he gets the ball. And when you think about it here at the end of the season, if I was a defensive coordinator, I'd be like, maybe that Doug Baldwin guy is a guy I need to stop because he's got all these touchdowns recently. I think that's going to open up the other side of the field, maybe underneath for Lockett. But he's definitely a very, very talented player, and I think that facing a really weak Browns team this week and a very pedestrian Rams defense, hopefully in someone's championship game, that's a guy that I think, is a flex start. He's a guy that he could produce. And, I mean, he has 100 yards and 90 yards the last 2 weeks. Those are some good numbers.
Yeah, definitely. And, like you said, he's going up against a Browns team that, is now without Joe Hayden for the rest of the season. So they virtually have nobody there in terms of, just cornerback help or just even secondary help for that matter. So I think this could be another great game for the Seahawks passing game, just considering how poorly that defense is for Cleveland. I don't know what to do with this guy, this next guy. I don't know what to do with him. So maybe you can give me a little bit of clarification. He's the ultimate boomer bust guy, I think, in terms of fantasy football right now. That's Ted Ginn. Now, obviously, Ted Ginn was this, overdrafted wide receiver coming out of college. I think he was picked like the top 15 picks by the 49ers. And hasn't done much as a receiver in his career, but now all of a sudden he's been doing really well. At least when you look at it on paper, 200 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns, but only 7 catches the past 2 weeks. He's literally, I think, the ultimate boomer bust guy, and he could go for for 100 and a touchdown, or he could go for 20 and nothing, and simultaneous weeks. So maybe you can give me a little more clarification. How do you handle Ted Ginn? Do you pick him up? Do you start him? What would you do with him?
That's a good question, and I wish I knew the answer to that riddle. But that's kind of how do you feel in fantasy? Do you gamble and kind of shoot for the moon, or are you a very conservative type of player? Because you only have to look 3 weeks ago with Ted Ginn facing the Cowboys, and he didn't get a target nor a catch. So I think the floor is even lower. I think you were giving him a little bit more credit because he has five touchdowns the last 4 games combined, but before that he only has 3 touchdowns in the whole year. So he's very, very sporadic. And even this last week, he caught 2 of his 3 targets, and they were for 2 touchdowns. Obviously he's evolving a little bit into a better receiver this year than he has any other year in his career, which is good for him. I think a lot of that has to do with Cam Newton. Cam Newton has to find somebody. But I think it goes all the way back to the beginning here, Doug, when we talked about how many injuries has your team taken. Can you withstand starting somebody else, or you're like, hey, you know what? I'm desperate. I'm the underdog in this lineup this week. I start Ted Ginn, or you could just pick up Ted Ginn so he doesn't face you and blow up too. So that's another strategy you could do.
Yeah, and honestly, I think for anybody who would start him, I think he literally could give somebody a heart attack. Because I remember watching him a few weeks ago. I think he had a touchdown. He had a catch. It would have gone for a touchdown, but then he dropped it. And he's done that a few times. And considering we're in the playoffs, it could literally give somebody, put someone in cardiac arrest. So he literally is just such a tough guy to gauge, and and how you use him. But yeah, no, if you got nothing to lose, like you said, why not? Carolina is they're going up against a really putrid Giants secondary. Who knows? He could do really well, or he could do really bad. It's I guess what side of the mirror you're looking at. Any wide receivers I'm missing? Any wide receivers that you'd recommend people picking up this week? I got really nobody else that I would want to talk about so much because the rest are probably already owned. But any others you would recommend?
Well, one guy that's kind of disappeared due to injury, and I don't know if he'd be out there because someone just got roasted and they didn't believe in him, would be Willie Snead. So he came back and had some pedestrian games. He had a game where he was basically just kind of a decoy, and then he was out again, and then he went for 122 yards. He got 7 of his 8 targets last week against Tampa. And in that offense, we already know the Saints don't have a defense. Like I literally don't even know if they have 11 guys on the field half the time. But they're not doing well, and so they got to throw. They just lost Mark Ingram, so they got to throw even more. And Snead's a good route runner. He's good. He's smart with how he uses stuff. Brandon Cooks to use him deep, so he clears out the underneath, and then Snead just kind of cleans up. So he's a guy that if he's out there, and again, he's withstood a lot of injuries, I could see him being a wide receiver 3 or a flex play quite easily this week.
Yeah, that was I actually wrote about him this week. I didn't know whether or not to talk about it, but you brought up some good points. Yeah, he finished second most on the team with targets, behind Marquise Colson, who I would have to say is sort of an outlier of a game. That's just a fluke, where Marquise Colson has not done anything this season really. And I remember when he used to do really well, and he used to be a must-start guy every week. But he just, I would have to think this is not something we're going to see every week where Marquise Colson goes for. I think he had 2 touchdowns. So, he took away from what Willie Snead could have possibly had. And he has a decent matchup this week, actually. He's facing Detroit, who has been, really good on defense lately, but they have really one shutdown corner, and that's Darius Slay. But for me, I feel like Darius Slay is going to have to cover Brandon Cooks more than he would cover Willie Snead, just because Brandon Cooks is that deep threat. He's an explosive playmaker who, another guy who's just really disappointing this season. But I would think just for precautionary reasons, they'd have to cover Cooks more with Slay than Snead, which could open up some things for him. So, yeah, I mean, he sat out last week with a calf injury, and he dealt with a knee injury before, like you said, two lower body injuries that could really take away from, what a wide receiver needs to be able to play efficiently. If there was anybody else, I think actually the three guys we talked about, the three I actually wrote about this week. So, I would say and from what I gather, he was owned in less than 50% of the leagues, Yahoo at least. So he's definitely still out there for a good portion of people. So if you had to go get him, I would. And lastly, the quarterback position. I'll go over it real quick. Obviously, not a lot of things have changed, except for, now Andy Dalton's out for the rest of the season, it looks like. Phillip Rivers is continuing to do horribly. Ryan Tannehill is still not being consistent enough. But one guy that I can't beat him to the ground enough, I can't stress enough, and he's still owned in less than 50% of Yahoo leagues. That's Ryan Fitzpatrick. I do not understand why Ryan Fitzpatrick is not owned in every league, because he has scored 9 touchdowns over the past 3 games, and he has thrown no interceptions. He has thrown for at least 260 yards in the past 3 games, and he has his healthy weapons. Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, and Chris Ivory with that run game. And Bilal Powell, too, has also been really good in the pass game. I just don't understand why Ryan Fitzpatrick is not owned. He's the model of consistency lately. That Jets offense has now become, what we used to think of the Jets defense. And I personally, I'm starting him, in any league that I have him, because I think he's not only a top, 12 quarterback, I think he's a top 8 quarterback weekly. I love him that much. And he's also facing the Cowboys, who are pretty tough against the pass, but, Ryan Fitzpatrick has faced tougher and still walked away doing really well. So for me, I love Ryan Fitzpatrick, and if he's not owned, he needs to be owned. Anybody you would recommend?
I could swear that, Doug, you're right here behind me, and you're looking. I typed up a couple of notes on my laptop here, and I have Fitzpatrick, and then I have in brackets I put 9 touchdowns last 3 games. And I'm like, what the heck? This guy's reading all my stuff. I'm with you. He's Fitzmagic, right? That's what you call him too. And the thing is he wasn't expected to do anything this year. He's in a contract year because they just signed him to a 1-year deal, and he's out here saying, hey, guess what? I can still play. And I think people forget over his career, no one's really counted on him to do much at all. He's at Buffalo. All he had was Stevie Johnson there. Then he goes to Houston last year. All he does is have a 17-8 touchdown quarterback or touchdown interception ratio. And then, we don't want you back. We want Brian Hoyer and Mallett, I guess. And then he does this again. I mean, this guy is a proven NFL veteran that can play football. Like you said, he got 2 good targets. He lost Devin Smith to an ACL, so that's not good. But he's got his main weapons, and they're in the hunt. They're fighting and battling for this playoff stuff. The Cowboys, they're essentially out of it. So while they are a decent pass defense, they're not really fighting anymore. I think that's a big thing you need to check at the end of the year here. Who's got the fight? Because, whoever wants that inch or that yard is really going to fight for it. I don't think the Cowboys are, and I think the Jets want it bad.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a key thing. They're still very much, I think they right now have the top wild card spot in the AFC right now. So they're going to keep playing the same way they are because they keep winning. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think we have to point to, it was a blessing in disguise almost that, what happened in the preseason with Geno Smith and IK Emenkamali or something like that. He's old news, but, because it gave Ryan Fitzpatrick a chance to start, and now he's taking over the spot. And, he had the thumb injury. I think he had a concussion. He had the thumb injury. He had surgery. He's fine now. His weapons are healthy. Marshall and Decker. Ivory has been consistent, and now Bilal Powell's coming on in the pass game. I just can't say enough about Fitzpatrick. He's been efficient, but also put up really good numbers in the meantime. So I love me some Fitzmagic, and if he's not owned, you need to go grab him, whether, you need a starter or you just need a backup. He should be owned either way. So we're going to go into our starts and sits this week. We'll go over the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. We'll pick one from each of those positions that we were telling people to must start this week, and then must sit, and then we'll give a lot of reasons why, and we don't pick them without good reason. So I'll go first because I have that kind of power, and we'll start with the starts, and we'll go with the quarterback position. And for me, for this guy that I picked, it's hard to like him, just considering how much he's burned people in the past. But considering his matchup and how he has done, at least in fantasy football, decently, especially since the offensive coordinator changed, I have to think that he has a chance to be a decent play this week. And I think he has to be started in leagues where you're not sure at quarterback who to pick, this guy or this guy. And it's Matt Stafford. Threw for 2 touchdowns and 1 pick, 245 yards on Sunday. But he's facing New Orleans. New Orleans has given up the 4th most points per game over the past 5 weeks. They've given up 9 touchdowns to only 1 interception over the past 3 games. I'm sorry, that's his ratio. I'm sorry. So he has 9 touchdowns to only 1 interception over the past 3 games. New Orleans has given up 12 touchdowns over the past 4 games. That's 3 per game. And then also given up over 250 yards per in that streak as well. He's got Golden Tate. He's got Calvin Johnson. Theo Riddick has done some stuff in the past game. He's got his weapons. Detroit has a really good defense right now. So we could definitely see Detroit having a good game again, especially against the Saints who have, no defense. Like you said, you don't even know if they have 11 men on the field. So I like Stafford this week. I think he could have a really good week. So that's my must start this week. But what about you, Nick? Who's that quarterback that you're telling people to start this week and why?
No, that's a good one. I just wanted to touch on one point. I watched a little film on that one, and I liked what Detroit did because they went back to their strengths of last year. They used Golden Tate and some of those screens and little pick plays where he excelled. So I know they didn't utilize Calvin a lot, but, when you utilize your guys in the right ways, it's like, hey, they look like they know what they're doing. So I think that's, again, like you said, the new coordinator kind of helping them out, and that's going to help Stafford in the long run. The one guy that's been surprising all year, but, I don't know, some people still might doubt him, but he's gotten hot lately, is Tyrod Taylor. So he had 3 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks and 3 weeks ago. This last week he only had 1 touchdown, but again he had 53 yards rushing. So that's the other part you have to account for. Here's a guy he puts up yards. He's efficient. He's finally finding this guy named Sammy Watkins again, who felt like was lost for most of the year, and now they're playing Washington. So this is a game that means a lot to both teams. You got Kirk Cousins. He looks to air it out quite a bit. Buffalo's got 6 wins. They're trying to get into the dance. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a shootout than people realize, and Tyrod just makes plays. And I think that's a guy that you want on a day where it's like, hey, is Tom Brady doing great anymore? Is some of these other quarterbacks, Dalton's gone, as you said. I think Tyrod's a guy that he can get hot. He can put up 30 points for you.
Yeah, definitely. He started off really hot during the beginning of the season. Then he had I think it was a knee injury that sort of derailed him for a few weeks. He had the MCL sprain, I think. And then he's really come back as of late. If I'm not mistaken, I think when I was doing a little bit of research on him, he's only thrown an interception, I think, in 3 games this season, or 2, something like that. He's been really efficient in terms of how he uses the ball and just making good decisions. And then, like you said, he has the ability to run the ball as well. I think he's had at least 25 yards rushing over the past 3 games, which when you think about it, isn't a lot, but the extra 2.5 points is the difference, as we saw a lot of people this weekend lose by a very close amount of points. So that could be the difference between winning and losing. But yeah, no, I love Tyrod Taylor, especially after what he's done the past few weeks, and this matchup is pretty good for him as well. going into the running back position, this guy did not do very well this weekend, this past weekend, I should say. But it was against a really tough run defense. But he's got an extremely good matchup this weekend against the 49ers, and that's Jeremy Hill. He only ran the ball 7 times for 16 yards against Pittsburgh. But part of that, I think, can be blamed towards just the quarterback change. You know, they dealt with, losing Dalton, then A.J. McCarron, then just Pittsburgh just destroying them. And they're just, in Cincinnati, was forced to throw the ball a lot and abandon the run game. But over the past 5 weeks, on a per-game basis, and I use 0.5 PPR in terms of scale and points, but over that span, they've actually given up the most points to running back, San Francisco, that is, who they're facing on Sunday. San Francisco has given up over 150 yards per game on average. They've given up 659 in the last 4 games. And they've actually given up 6 rushing touchdowns over the past 4 games as well. And if you can give Isaiah Crowell the game that he had, I can only imagine what you can give Jeremy Hill, who, he's been inconsistent this season. He certainly hasn't had the season that we had hoped he would have had, but I think he has a really good chance to bounce back this week. Marvin Lewis came out, Hugh Jackson said that they weren't going to change their game plan just because A.J. McCarron's at quarterback. So I have a feeling that they could, put up points early and just sit back on the run game. And I think that Jeremy Hill could have 100-yard and a touchdown game. But what about you? What about that running back that you want people starting this week?
You know what? I'm going to go back to what we talked about earlier. There's 2 guys I think you really need to keep an eye on that can be cheap, but I think they have some really good value, like Denard Robinson and Tim Hightower. So, Denard Robinson, the Jaguars, they're fighting. That's the one that I like the most, to be honest. But they're fighting for a playoff spot, right? They're fighting for that division title. He can catch the ball, which we know. He had a bunch of yards last week, as you said, in a very limited amount of time. And now he plays Atlanta, which Atlanta, kind of early in the year, they were a much better run defense than they have been lately. And I think a lot of that ties to what I alluded to earlier in regards to Atlanta's lost so many games in a row. Do they really have the fight anymore? They just seem like they kind of quit, on their new coach. And so I think that's a guy that they're going to feed the ball. Of course they have the weapons to push downfield, so they're not going to have a stacked box. They're going to get up early, and they're just going to feed him. So I think he's definitely a guy that can get you a lot more points than you actually think. And while we're trying to get these tough decisions, and you're like, oh, boy, it's a big game, go with the guy that's going to get you points. Denard's going to get you, at least 10 points, in my opinion, if not more. That's without counting in a touchdown, which he can get.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point, and that's what I've been trying to tell people. The Jaguars are fighting for a playoff spot. I think they're tied with another team for the lead in the AFC South. So if they're not going to play T.J. Yeldon, it's for a good reason, because they certainly want their starting running back out there. But like I said, Denard Robinson did really well in limited time last year, and he's facing Atlanta, like you said. I don't even understand. They started out 5-0, and then they've lost 7 in the past 8. It's tough because I actually really like Dan Quinn, and I liked a lot of things I was seeing at Atlanta, and nothing seems to be going right. They just lost 38-0 against Carolina. So, yeah, do they have the fight anymore? Because they're not going to win the division with Carolina being undefeated, and they're below 500. They just literally have been downright the most disappointing team this second half of the season. Just considering what they did the first half. So yeah, no, they've also given up a ton of rushing touchdowns, which, Denard Robinson, like you said, could just sit back and run all day once they rack up the points. Jaguars, that is. So I like that matchup. I thought about him as well. For my must-start wide receiver this week, we go with the generic name John Brown a little bit. 4 catches, 78 yards on 5 targets, and a touchdown against Minnesota. Facing Philadelphia, over the past 5 weeks on a per-game basis, they've given up the 6th most points in half PPR leagues to wide receivers. John Brown has at least 75 yards receiving or a touchdown in the past 4 games. And Philadelphia has given up 10 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers over the past 5 games. So that's 2 a game. They have a ton of weapons there. They have Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd, J.J. Nelson, John Brown, David Johnson. But I think John Brown, when healthy, he had the hamstrings issue earlier in the season. But when he's healthy, like he has been, he's been, besides maybe Larry Fitzgerald, the most consistent wide receiver for Carson Palmer and the Cardinals, who have a really prolific offense, even though they've lost Andre Ellington and Chris Johnson, their 2, I guess, starting running backs. So for me, I think John Brown is a weekly threat for either a high yardage total or a touchdown, and he's been doing that as of late. I don't see that changing, even though the Eagles have won 2 straight. I just don't see it changing, and I think John Brown is gonna continue to do work, and I love this matchup for him. So I'm gonna tell people must start him this week. What about you? What about your must start wide receiver this week?
I really like John Brown. That's a good call there, Doug. I'm going to go kind of the other way. Okay, so I know this is the time when we kind of fret over our start sits a lot, and it's like, hey, you know what? This guy's kind of got me there. I need to put him in here regardless of matchup. And I'm going to say Martavis Bryant. And he's going up against Denver at home. Now Denver's got the number 1 pass defense. What are you thinking? I need to start. I need to sit him. I need to put in, Kamar Aiken or something. Let's remember something, okay? Martavis Bryant was the most efficient rookie wide receiver last year, even over Odell Beckham on a fantasy point per game basis and target per game basis. So now we look at him this year, and he's been super efficient this year. He has a touchdown in every game but 3 after his suspension, and it looks like it's almost like an every other game basis where he kind of has a blow-up game. I mean, we go 4 weeks ago, he went 6 for 178 and a touchdown, then he was 5 for 69, 4 for 114 and a touchdown, 7 for 49. This is the week where it's like, hey, you know what? They're going to maybe utilize him a little bit more. If you look at where Khalid's going to be matched up on, you got to think he's going to want to try and shut down Antonio Brown more so than Bryant. But even if he's matched up on Bryant, we've seen Josh Gordon separate from Khalid. We've seen other things, and they're not going to bracket Bryant, in my opinion. They're going to bracket Antonio Brown. So I could see Big Ben hitting him for at least 1 big play, if not more. And this guy is developing. He is a very good wide receiver. I don't think people give him enough credit. And he's a guy that I would start because, you know what? I want to win, and this guy gets you championships.
So this is kind of crazy. I don't think this has ever happened. I've been talking fantasy football for 2 years now, and I've never seen this happen. We have very differing opinions on Martavis Bryant because he's actually my must-sit wide receiver this week. Believe it or not. So it's a little bit shocking to me. But I'll get into my reasons why in a little bit. Obviously, we have a little bit of a disagreement. I can't fully support your pick, but yeah, I've never seen that happen. So it'll be interesting when I talk about it and what I come up with. But
what we're record setting today, Doug, right? Setting records today.
Yeah, that's what we do. We set records. So my must start tight end this week is actually going to be somebody on the other side of the game that we talked about. I'm sorry, no, we have not talked about him. That's Ben Watson. Ben Watson with the Saints. Had a really good game. He had 7 catches for 70 yards on 11 targets against Tampa. Facing Detroit, they've given up the 4th most points on a per game basis over the past 5 weeks in half PPR leagues to tight ends. They've given up on average over 70 yards a game over the past 5 games to tight ends, 352 yards in 5 games, and 4 touchdowns also in that span. So, he has an 80% chance of getting a touchdown, I guess you could call it. And he's had at least 8 targets over the past 3 games. He's turned into really this efficient guy. I remember earlier in the season, or even before the season, I think what was his name? Josh Hill. I think people thought he was going to be the next Jimmy Graham, but it turns out Ben Watson has been. Not the next Jimmy Graham, but the next featured tight end in New Orleans. And I just think Ben Watson's been incredibly efficient, and I think he has another great matchup this week, so I'm definitely going to go with Ben Watson this week. What about you for your must-start tight end?
I got to go against my home team here. I'm going to go with Kyle Rudolph against Chicago, and I'm not a big Kyle Rudolph fan. I wasn't him coming out, but Chicago's defense is banged up. Antro Roll just went on IR. Shea McClellan can't cover anybody. They're just very beat up on that defense, and so I just saw Jordan Reed blow up against them last week. Before that, they faced San Francisco and Green Bay, who don't utilize the tight end a lot. But before that was Denver. Vernon Davis and Owen Daniels just had a heyday against them. So I can see Kyle Rudolph just getting a lot of receptions, maybe not a lot of yards because he's not super fast, but I can see him just accumulating a lot of stats. So he's one of those guys that you may look at him and be like, I don't know, but he's definitely a guy that's going to get some stats this week.
Yeah, no, he's done better than bad as of late, so I could definitely see that happening. So we're going to go into our must-sits now. It looks like we have to speed up a little bit, but not too much. We have about 9 minutes left to get through 8 players. But for me, my must-sit quarterback this week is actually going to be Eli Manning. He had a really good game last night, 337 yards and 4 touchdowns. But that was against the Dolphins. He's going up against Carolina. Carolina, over the past 5 weeks per game, has given up the second fewest points to quarterbacks. They've given up only 5 touchdowns in the past 5 games to quarterbacks, and they've gotten 8 interceptions in that span as well. You got Odell Beckham facing Josh Norman, arguably the wide receiver cornerback matchup of the season. And Carolina, on average, has only given up 222 passing yards for the past 5 games, with just over 1,100 in that span. I don't like this matchup for Eli because besides Odell, he's got nothing. He literally has nothing. Maybe Will Tye, but you can't rely on him to go for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I don't like Eli's matchup this week. I don't think Odell's going to do as well as people think. I think he can still put up decent stats, but I don't think he'll have sort of game he had last night, which directly ties to Eli's fantasy outlook. What about you for your must-sit quarterback this week?
I hate that I'm hating on my own team here, but it's Jay Cutler. So I know people have a really bad connotation with Cutler, but he's had a pretty good year. 16 touchdowns, 7 picks. That's a very different ratio than people would think, especially considering Jeffrey's been hurt off and on all year, and they don't have hardly anybody else to throw to. But in his last 5 games, he has 3 touchdown passes. This last week he had 2, but he just didn't look right. Even though the stats look good, he just wasn't accurate. Things were off, and they lost again. And so now Chicago's basically out of it. I don't think it's mathematical, but it's basically out of it. And then you look at the Vikings. They're kind of reeling. They've had a lot of close games, but the Bears are going to be on the road. The Vikings are hungry. They really need a win. And I could see them pinning their ears back, coming after Cutler. And all he has really is Jeffrey and Zach Miller to throw to. And I could see it just not being a really good game for him.
Yeah, no, I don't like this matchup for Jay Cutler either. I will mention, though, he does have Langford and Forte to throw to. But, I still don't like this matchup for Cutler. My must-sit running back this week is actually going to be Buck Allen. 8 carries, 14 yards, not very good at all. 5 catches, 44 yards on 9 targets. Facing Kansas City this week, they've given up per game over the past 5 weeks to running backs, the 5th fewest in half PPR leagues. They've given up an average of 65 yards rushing over the past 5 games with 325. And they've only allowed 3 touchdowns over the past 5 games, 2 rushing, 1 receiving. Plus, he's got that horrible quarterback situation where nobody knows who's going to be throwing the ball to him. It could be Ryan Mallett this week, for God's sakes. Who knows who's playing quarterback for the Ravens now that Flacco's out? I just don't like this matchup for Buck Allen. And now that Joe Flacco's not in there, and I guess Matt Schaub not being in there most likely, hurts his fantasy value a lot. So I'm going to sit Buck Allen this week. What about you for your must-sit running back?
Ronnie Hillman is my must-sit. The Pittsburgh's run defense is a lot better than people give it credit for. They've played a lot better, I think, in the second half of the year here. He had 12 carries for 20 yards last week against the Raiders, which it's not that great of a run D. The week before that, he went 19 for 56 against San Diego. I don't think he's fully healthy. I think that, that offensive line is reeling. And obviously, I don't think teams fear Brock Osweiler, so they're crowding the line. I know I've heard reports Peyton might be practicing a little bit this week. We don't know who exactly is going to start, but he's not a guy I want to take a chance on in a big-time fantasy game this week.
Yeah, no, especially with C.J. Anderson. He did dress for Sunday, but he didn't play, but he could definitely have a chance to play and actually play snaps this weekend. So, yeah, I don't like Ronnie Hillman either, especially with what Pittsburgh just did to Jeremy Hill. My must-sit wide receiver this week is the guy that Nick actually told people to start this week. That's Martavis Bryant. Martavis Bryant had 7 catches, 49 yards on 9 targets against Cincinnati this past weekend. But he's facing Denver. They've given up the fewest points to wide receivers over the past 5 weeks per game in half PPR leagues. They've given up 2 touchdowns all season to Mike Wallace and Seth Roberts. So obviously Martavis Bryant can't be one of the guys who gets another one. So there has to be some complete unknown guy. It has to be. And they're only giving up about 70 yards per game to wide receivers. That's it. To all wide receivers over the past 5 games. 351 yards in the past 5 games. So between Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant, I don't see them going for 200 yards. I don't see them going for 150. I know Pittsburgh has been doing really well, but I think Antonio Brown's going to have a chance to do really well. I think Martavis Bryant gets shut down between, getting double covered with the cornerback and the safety help. I don't like this matchup this week for him. So, countering Nick a little bit, I just don't like Martavis Bryant this week. But, you got 2 differing opinions, so who knows? Maybe it's a coin flip. But who's your must-sit wide receiver this week?
Well, this is going to support your theory. I'm going to say Amari Cooper. So Amari Cooper didn't catch any of his 8 targets against Denver last week. But I think part of this is Amari Cooper's hitting the rookie wall. The rookie wall is real. In his last 5 games, he doesn't have a touchdown. If you want to go over his last 7, he has 1 touchdown. Over those last 7, he only has 1 game over 100 yards and only 2 games over 80 yards. So you're looking at a guy that started off really well, but, man, he's figuring out the NFL is a long season. It's a physical game. And, again, he's only a 21-year-old kid. He came into the NFL really young. And that's a guy that I would sit this week. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a super tough matchup, against Green Bay. I mean, Sam Shields is banged up a little bit, but that's not a guy that I'm like, well, if you want to start a guy this week, you want to get that touchdown or a lot of yards. And I don't see Cooper doing it, even if I do see Martavis Bryant doing it.
Yeah, he's really sizzled after a hot start to the season, and not to say that he doesn't have the chance to bounce back, but, yeah, he just hasn't been doing well. And he faced Denver, but 8 targets, no catches, that's something. So, yeah, I don't really I'm not sure about Amari Cooper for the rest of the season unless we see something different. But we got about 2 minutes left. Let's go through our tight ends real quick so we can do some more plugs. My must-sit this week is Jason Witten. I won't even talk about his stat line from last week. He's facing New York, the Jets, that is. He has not scored a touchdown since week 1. And New York is giving up an average of 45 yards per game to tight ends and no touchdowns over the past 5 games. Don't like this matchup at all for him. Sit him, please. What about your must-sit tight end this week?
Richard Rodgers. I mean, he had that Hail Mary catch, which added a lot, and he had a decent game 2 weeks ago against the Lions. This week he got 2 targets. Sure, he got a touchdown, but he had 2 targets. You thought that was like the breakout game, right? Something big was going to happen. It didn't happen. That's not a guy you want to count on, not when it's a very clutch time for fantasy. So that's a guy I'm avoiding.
Yeah, no, he's just been terribly inconsistent all season, and I think that touchdown just, it was a 60-yard Hail Mary that he somehow grabbed, so that just really inflated his stats. But that'll do it for us here this week on the show. I want to thank Nick for coming on. Been a great guest, even though we butted heads a little bit about the Martavis Bryant. Be sure to follow Nick on Twitter. @_ Nick Whalen, all one word. Follow Dynasty League Football at DL Football. Be sure to check out his Saturday to Sunday podcast, the Devy Report, all of his stuff. He's been doing really well. Check out the Nickel Press. Check out on Twitter at Nickel Press TV. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at DMoreNFL. Check out the new Hanging Einstein this week with Andy, of course. Good luck this week, and you'll thank us later.